All right, hello everybody. Nice to see you again. Today we're going to be going through just a quick little intro into Hot 2000. We're not going to be building a house or anything like that today, but we'll go through like kind of a general little setup and then go over what on-screen stuff you should or shouldn't be touching when you're building a file. So let's hop right into it. So first, we're just going to open Hot 2000, and I should preface this is version 11.11. So if you're watching this in a year or two, it might be on a different version of Hot 2000. But this is what it looks like now. And first, we're just going to go to File. Going to go to New. So, well, actually, before we get into that, there's File Preferences. So in here, you can set up a few different things. So if you wanted to autosave before you calculate the file or look at the reports, you can have it set to be maximum size on startup, etc., etc. One thing I recommend doing here is checking do not warn when client region is different than weather region, because when you put in the weather location in Hot 2000, depending what province you're in and where in the province the house is, you might be picking a weather region from a different province. And if you do that, you're going to get a warning pop up very often when you're working on the file. So by clicking this, you don't have to worry about that anymore. And then here you can set up your weather region, pick whatever city you think is going to be the most common that you'll be using. And then you can also input your default fuel cost library here. If you have a different code library or your service organization is providing you with one, you could put it in there. And I would leave the economics, and I'm not sure about the house builder library, what that is. And then on this tab, so display units, you can set while you're working on Hot 2000. It could be metric, imperial, or US. And then the report units, same thing as well. And then here you can have file open save directory. So you can always have it set to a default directory every time to save your file, or just start in the last directory used, depending how you have your file folders set up. And then under user information here, if we type in, so I'll put in my username, Maritimers. And then you'd put in your service organization here. We'll just say SO. And then, so your file ID, the first two numbers are going to be your service organization numbers, and then the second two are going to be yours. So in this case, let's just use 1, 2, 3, 4. And then here you can put in the address of your service organization's office, so this stuff will populate on the auto-generated reports that we'll get into another time. But we do this for now, we hit OK. And then there's two ways to start a file. So we can go in, we can go house wizard. I was never trained to use the house wizard, so I'm not going to be going over that today, probably another time, but we'll just start with the house. But essentially the house wizard is just putting in a bunch of information that we're going to be going over in the new house anyway. It just sort of pre-populates the file for you, and then you go through and double check all the walls and ceilings and stuff that you've entered. But for us, we'll just start with a house. And then I like to start with a blank screen so that I know like anything that I've added is something I've added, not something that was there before. So I don't want any ceilings, no walls, no foundation, no exposed floors, no doors or windows. And we're going to hit create. This is what it's going to look like when you first open up, but you can see here our file ID populated. My name's there, the company name is there. And then what you would do, depending if you're doing, you know, a D file, E file, N file, or P file, you'd go like D if it's a D file, and if it's your first file, you're going to have 5 numbers after the D, so we'll put 4 zeros and a 1, 4, 5, oop. Oop. There we go. Oop, too many. 4, 5. And then on this page, things to know. So this is just when you click house, and then general, we have all these other tabs at the top, but we'll start here. So essentially, most of the time you're going to be putting in your file ID there. If you're doing an E or an N file, you would copy the previous file ID from here and stick it in there. And then the other things to know, ownership, most of the time it's going to be a private dwelling, but there are other options here depending specifically what it is. And I don't know, different provinces might be working different sort of housing types and stuff like that, so you can change that there if you have to. Property tax roll number, so this is different in every province, but essentially depending on what province you're in, your service organization should have most likely a website you'd go to type in the address of the house. It's going to give you a number, property ID number, property assessment number, something to stick in there. And you absolutely have to stick that in there. That way it's able to link the house files from any previous audits that were done, and it doesn't rely on the homeowner information because, you know, the homeowner can change, but the property assessment number or property identification number is always going to stay the same. So you definitely have to fill that out. House ID, nothing to fill out for that for now. Homeowner authorization ID, nothing to fill out for that. Builder name, if you're working on new home files, the builders get a number from Enercan, and then your SO would just have a list of that, so you would copy and paste that in if you're working with a builder. Then the evaluation date, if it's a D file, be the day you're on site. If it's a P file, so a new home file, it would be the registration date that they signed up for the program. Username, you can put your phone number in, company, their phone number, and then you just go in here, fill in the client's info, pick the province. I'm just going to pick one. I'll just say, yeah, I'm not going to bother filling anything out. I am going to fill out postal code though, just because we'll get a pop-up error every time if we don't. And then if they have a different mailing address for some reason, you can fill that out down there. But you can also, if the normal address is the mailing address, you can just hit same as above. It'll fill it all in for you. And then on the info tab, there's going to be some things you need to fill in here. And this is also province specific. So you're going to click add, and then info 2 is going to be your province identifier. So depending what province you're in, you're going to click over on the value side, and then you would enter in the program identification number. And then this can also, in the same province, there can be multiple numbers depending if there's different programs. So if the new homes program is different than the existing homes program, or there's a low income program or something else, there could be different values you'd be putting in here every time, but it's always going to be info 2. And this just lets Enercan know which program the file is going through, essentially. And if there is no provincial program, then you put in NPI. So this is no program identifier. Then on top of that, depending on the province you're in, you might have to fill in like info 5, info 7, etc., etc. They don't need to be numerical, like you could have info 7, then info 5, etc., etc. That just covers the basics there. And then under the specifications tab, so we've got house, and then if you're doing MERBs, you get those options, and then under house type, most of the time it's probably going to be a single detached, but there is also double semi-detached. So if you have a side-by-side, you'd want to be using that. Some of the other common ones, if you got a row house end unit or a row house middle unit, a mobile home, etc., etc. So you just pick the appropriate one. And it is important if you have a house that is attached to another one, make sure you pick the right one, because it's going to add some extra info when you're building the foundation. It's going to ask for the perimeter that's touching, essentially, or it's going to ask for all of the perimeter of the foundation except for what's touching the other one, so it knows the attachment length between the two. Plan shape, this doesn't affect the file at all, but it's more of a reference for yourself, so you can go through and be like, this house was kind of a T shape or an L shape or however many corners. The number of stories, so you want to be inputting if it's 1 story, and this story is above grade, so not including the basement. So if we had a basement and a story, it'd be 1 story. Let's see, 1.5 is if you have knee walls. 2 stories, 2.5, 3. Split level. So split level is when you walk in, and then the main floor is offset from itself on either side, like you can see right here. And then there's also just split entry raised base. So this is when you walk in and you either go right upstairs or right downstairs. And then you've got to enter the orientation of the front of the house. For the year built, you need to switch this to user specified, and then you put in the year it was built. Let's say this is an older home. And then wall color, you're going to leave this defaulted most of the time. Unless the majority of the home is uninsulated, then you're going to want to actually pick the color of the siding of the house. And if there's multiple colors of siding around the house or different types of siding, just whatever the majority is, pick that. And if the color is not available, just pick whatever's closest. And the only other thing you need to touch on this is you want to make sure default roof cavity inputs is checked. Sometimes this unchecks itself. And then down here, you got to put in the above grade and below grade floor areas. So let's just say we got 1200 above grade and I don't know, 895 below grade or something like that. And then on the weather tab, so there is a website, and I'll just pull that up now. But essentially, you just come here to this website, type in the address of the house, and then what it's going to do, if you look around, you can see all these different areas. So I'll come over here because I'm familiar with the Maritimes. So let's just say we had a house and we type in the address and it's located somewhere up here. On the side, it'll pop up like this, and we know that Bathurst would be our weather city to choose. So we would go in here, we'd go New Brunswick, and then we'd say Bathurst. So fuel cost, if you've already set up your file preferences, then this should be defaulted in. Otherwise, you can come in, hit change, go and find it, and then link it to that. Units and modes, this should already be set up. But then also here under programs. So right now, whenever you open up Hot2000, it's in general mode. And then we'd want to switch it to either EnerGuide rating system, or if you're Ontario, let's set it to the Ontario reference house. I'm not going to do that right now because once you switch it, the program gets a lot beefier, and when you save it, it takes a long time to calculate and to save. So I tend to switch mine near the end of the file. Just saves me some time every time I'm saving. I don't have to wait 30 seconds to a minute for it to save. Window tightness, you shouldn't have to adjust this at all. And code summary, if you open up someone else's file, so say you're doing an E file or an N file, any custom codes that they used in the previous file will be here, and you can copy them to your code library if you want to. And then the next things to get into, we'll just go down all these tabs on the side. So under the temperatures tab, you shouldn't have to touch this at the beginning, but after you've got either your basement or crawl space or slab or whatever in, and you've kind of built the file, I'd come back here and just double check this is set up. So as per NRCan requirements, basements are assumed to be heated always, even if they're not, because heat transfer and whatnot, you know, they are getting some heat from the main floor, second floor. So you just want to have that heated. If there is a separate thermostat, if it's cooled in the basement, you can set that. And depending on the type of crawl space you have, it may be heated or not. And you may be including the volume of the crawl space in the file or not. Just depends. Base loads, you're never going to need to touch this unless you're doing some stuff for net zero files, but we're not getting into that today. And then generation, if they have solar panels or wind, this is where you'd be putting that stuff in. But for the most part, when you start a new file on the house, you come, you fill out the general tab, your info tab, specs, weather, and then you can basically hop down to natural air infiltration. And then on this page, we only really need to enter in the house volume here, and then the above grade height of highest ceiling there. And if you're doing a P file, your SO might have a specific preset air tightness they go with. It might be this one. It might be, you might have to go blower door test values, and then maybe it's 2.5. And then if it is 2.5, you want to also switch it to CGSB and calculated here. Otherwise, you might get an error because the equivalent leakage area, if you don't set it to calculated and it just stays at the default, it might say the test is out of range, etc. So if you switch it to CGSB and calculated, you'll avoid that. Or if you're doing an actual file that you've done an air test on, so a D file or an E file or an N file, you go to blower door test values, check air leakage test data, and now we get this tab up here. You would come in here, and you want to have it set to as operated because that's how the test should be performed. Put in your outside air temperature, your inside air temperature. If you recorded them in Celsius, you can come up here, click on units, switch to metric, go back to natural air infiltration. We're going to get an error because we didn't enter any data yet. You can put in your Celsius, and then you can switch back to imperial. And then here, so we'd fill in the temperatures. You'd pick your fan type, and this is important because it's going to give you the proper flow ranges. And then we'd put in our initial and final pressures for the test. If we haven't put a volume in, we put it there. So let's say, I don't know, 22,304. for our volume. And then down here, we would enter all of our pressures. And it doesn't matter what order you enter them in. So you can either start -50 or -15, however you have them written down. But so I'll just show you. You want to put in the negative if you're doing a depressurization test. So let's say it's -50. And then if you've measured the other reading in pascals, you enter it there. If you measured it in CFM, you'd go to CFM, type in whatever the CFM would be, and then you pick your proper ring that you did the test with for that particular data point. And after you've entered all your inputs, so you should have at least a minimum of 5 valid data points. You probably take an 8, maybe more if it's a windy day. Enter them all in, click update, and then you would want to double check that your relative error is under 6%. Your correlation coefficient is above 0.99. Your flow exponent needs to be between 0.5 and 1. And then any of these error points for your data over here need to be below 7, I believe. 7 or 6. I always get these two percentages mixed up. So if you have any that are over that, you can just delete them out by coming over here. 0 on the first number, hit tab, you're good. And then you'd update again. But we're not actually doing a test, so I'm just going to set this to a preset so we don't get any errors. Under the ventilation tab, on this main page here, there's really only one thing we need to do most of the time, and that's if they have a ventilation system. Is it tied into a furnace ductwork, or does it have its own ductwork? So if it's tied into a furnace, you'd leave it as forced air heating ductwork. If it has its own, you're either going to select a dedicated low volume ductwork, probably pick that most of the time. If you know it has transfer fans, you'd put dedicated ductwork with transfer fans. So those are your options. And then we go to whole house components, and here we'd enter in either a heat recovery ventilator, or if they have an older air exchanger that's not heat recovery ventilator, that would be a utility fan. And utility fan by default only has an exhaust flow rate. So you want to go to edit details. If your has a supply, you just want to set it to the same CFM. So basically it's 53. Then we'd hit OK. We are entering an HRV. We would go to edit details. If you can find the actual specifications, what you're looking for on the HVI website is the CFMs for supply and exhaust. Those need to match. And then if you have the wattages, you can uncheck default fan power, put in the watts at the 32 degrees Fahrenheit for that CFM, and put in the efficiency. And then for the exhaust at -13, put in the watts at that CFM, and then the efficiency at that as well. And we will go over that in another video. We'll do a video on how to look up mechanical specs and stuff like that. And then under supplemental components, always leave the dryer, even if they don't have a dryer in the house, just because we're comparing, house A to house B, and the majority of homes in Canada do have a dryer, so the default is to always include it. But we're allowed to put in, if they have any other fans that exhaust to the outdoors, you're allowed to put a maximum of 1 range hood and 2 bathroom fans, even if they have more than that, because I believe, the thinking behind it is like, if they've got 4 bathrooms and 4 bathroom fans, what are the odds that all 4 are being used at the same time? So this kind of just represents an average home in Canada, once again. And then under heating and cooling, we would be putting in any, or whatever the heating and cooling systems are for the house. If it's baseboards, you just leave it. You come here, you can see it's deep. It'll calculate the sizing of the baseboards. And it's always going to be 100% steady state efficiency, because that's how electric resistance works. So you never need to change that. If you had a furnace, you go click furnace, you'd pick your fuel type. Depending, say it's natural gas, it's going to give you a few options. And most of these are listed kind of from oldest to newest in a way. So if we click on the top one, you can see the default efficiency of 77. If we hit down, the furnace with spark ignition is a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, a little higher. And if you can find the specs for the furnace, you'd want to put in the output capacity by switching this to user specified. Let's say it's 80,000. And then if you can get the efficiency and AFUE, Or steady state. For condensing, I believe it always has to be AFUE, and then the flue diameter as well. Get that. Boiler, kind of the same thing. If you have combos, so say you have hot water baseboards as well as that boiler provides the shower, we'd use combo heating. If you have a CSA system, you'd use that there. And then if they have any air source heat pump, water source heat pump, ground source, or an air conditioner, this isn't a window air conditioner. This would be like a heat pump that only cools. You put that stuff in there, and we'll just take a quick look at this. Under heat pump, if it only heats, leave it at heating. If it does both, switch it over, and then we're going to pick our type. So is it a central split? Is it a central single package system? So that's kind of like a rooftop system. You probably won't see those too often. Or is it a mini split ductless? And then down here, we can put in the capacity, HSPF SEER, if you know them. And then depending on the type of heat pump, you might need to either leave the temperature cutoff to balance point, change it to restricted, and set the temperature that it operates down to. Or if it's like a ground source heat pump, it would be unrestricted. And then also there's a website to look up if it's a cold climate heat pump. If there is, then there's a whole different way to enter them here. So we'll go over that as well in another video. Domestic hot water screen. So if it's an electric tank, you just pick electric. Conventional tank, this is like a 30-year-old tank. You're probably not going to see many of these. It's probably going to be a conserver. It's sort of the default for a standard electric tank you see nowadays, or it could be instantaneous. If it's a heat pump, right now we can only choose integrated heat pump. And then we do that, you have to switch the energy factor to user specified. If I go to change this, I can't. Oh, normally you can't. And what you do is you click off the hot water, you click back on, then we go here, we go 0.9. That's the default always. And then the COP is actually the energy factor of that tank divided by 0.9 to get that. Tank location, where it is. If it's uniform energy factor you find, you'd switch it over to that. And then you also define the draw pattern. If the other tanks, so if, you know, they might have a natural gas, could be any of these. And then what you're also looking for, well, not with instantaneous, but for the majority of the other ones, you want to be inputting the tank volume, the energy factor if you can find it, if not, leave defaults, and the tank location. That's kind of the majority of what you'll be doing. And then after you've done all this, you would start building the house. In order to do that, click back on the house tab up here, and then you've got your ceilings, exposed floors, basement, crawl space, slab, walkout. We don't currently use the walkout button. We'll go over that in another video, how to do walkouts. But basically, it's a basement and a slab mixed together. And then we have our walls here. And then once we've got a wall or a basement, so now we can also add a floor header or doors and windows to the wall components. And that's pretty much a quick little overview of Hot 2000. So future video, we'll be having a actual walkthrough how to build a house from start to finish. We'll do another video where we'll be going over how to look up heat pump information, how to do cold climate heat pumps, how to do ventilation systems, etc., etc. So if you enjoyed this video, thank you very much. Maybe shoot me a little like, subscribe, follow, and I will catch you at the next one. Have a good one.